Today we're having a different discussion, a topic that you might hear whispered about, but very rarely shouted from the rooftops. Male abuse. Men are never abused. Men are always the abusers. These myths are not only wrong, but they have terrible implications. Stereotypes like this continue to cause division between men and women, and it leaves many of our men suffering in silence. This allows the cycles of abuse to continue. But what if I told you that nearly 1 in 4 men have been victims of some form of contact sexual violence, physical violence, or stalking by an intimate partner? And yet, how often do we hear these stories? Society loves to paint men as the aggressors, the ones who can't be hurt, the ones who don't feel pain. Today, we are going to take a deep look at whether or not this is true. My name is Nicole Brittney, author and empowerment coach, and this is the Self Mastery Podcast, where we talk about healing, we talk about empowerment, we talk about the tough issues, and we talk about reclaiming your confidence after abuse. This is a subject that the world needs more guidance on. Today, we're dismantling myths and shedding light on the silent crisis. Men get abused too. I came across a story detailing 6 years of emotional and physical abuse that a gentleman received at the hands of a woman. And I'm going to read just a little bit of that story to you. All right. In my younger years, I dated a petite young lady. She was a wonderful partner in all things except for jealousy. One afternoon, I came home from work to find a very upset young lady. She claimed that I had been cheating on her and that her friends from school had seen the whole thing. So I told her I'd been working in the opposite direction. I couldn't have been seen by her friends because I was in a warehouse at the time. Rational thought was not able to take hold in this situation. She pummeled me, punched me, split my eyebrow, and both my upper and lower lip were cut and bleeding. I refused to defend myself because I'd always been taught you don't put your hands on a woman. The only thing that saved me from further assault was my younger brother, who happened to have a key to the apartment and walked in while this took place. She backed off, she spit at me, and told my brother that I was a cheating scumbag and that I deserved it. He goes on to say that on another occasion, she stabbed him in the arm, and at this point, he had no choice but to call the police. And guess what happened? The police arrived and they arrested him. His abuser stood there crying she played the victim, and the system failed him completely. It was only after multiple reports, multiple gathering of evidence, that the truth finally came out. But by then, the damage was done. I mean, physically, mentally, emotionally, he had been through it. And it's not that stories like this are rare. They're just rarely told. Abuse isn't about strength or gender. It's about power. And this is a prime example of that. This next one flipped the script on how we view abuse. So we're looking back at the Johnny Depp and Amber Heard defamation trial from 2022. Don't know how many of you all caught this, but this wasn't just a Hollywood scandal. This ignited a fire under conversations about men as victims. All right, so Johnny Depp stood up for himself. He sued Heard, his ex-boo, over a 2018 article that she wrote for the Washington Post, where she described herself as a survivor of domestic violence. And she didn't name him explicitly, but it was obvious that she was referring to her old boo, Johnny Depp. All right, so Depp said that it ruined his career. So he took her to court, and what unfolded in that Virginia courtroom, a very raw, messy look at their relationship. All right, so Depp claimed that he was the one that got abused. His defense team shared audio recordings where Heard admitted to hitting him. She was on the audio tape saying things like, "I didn't punch you, I hit you." And all the while, even in the tapes, it sounded like Depp was trying to de-escalate the situation and calm her down. He went on to testify about physical attacks. He talked about one situation where she had thrown bottles at him and one had severed his fingertip. All right, he talked about the emotional torment that she put him through, that she would taunt him, she would tease him, make fun of him for not fighting back. Right now, Heard countered with her own allegations. She had pictures of bruises, she had her own stories. But in this case, the jury mostly sided with Johnny Depp and they awarded him 10 million. Heard got 2 million on a counterclaim, and the story was everywhere, which I'd have to say, I was glad to hear the noise about it because it opened up the same conversation that we're having today. And that is the conversation that for male victims, abuse does happen. Now, this is a double-edged sword. On one hand, it was high profile proof that men can be abused. On the other hand, everyone made fun of Depp for speaking out. So this continues the cycle of emotional abuse where humiliation is used just to control and to make someone feel a certain type of way about their actions. So on one hand, he was getting it, allegedly from his ex-love. On the other end, he's now getting it from society. Now, I wasn't there, so I don't know where the truth lies. So I don't think that this is a story about who did what. This is a story about abuse and dynamics, power dynamics, all right? In this case, two people tearing each other apart. And then we have a system that can't see past gender at all. So Depp's story, his story doesn't erase Heard's. But before that court case, before those tapes were released, no one believed Johnny Depp. They didn't want to hear it. All right, that's the real problem. Why was it so hard to believe him? Why did he almost lose his career when he had proof of his own? Why is it so hard to believe survivors of abuse in general? That's a question that matters. Men are out here suffering too, and shame in many cases is keeping them quiet. Stigmas are keeping men quiet, all right? And we can't touch on these last two stories without considering this next one. And it is a good one. It is completely outrageous, but it's good. Deep Water, Ben Affleck, Ana de Armas. Look it up. This movie is an unsettling look at toxic relationship dynamics. It completely nails it. All right. Affleck plays Vic, a husband who's in an open relationship with the stunning Melinda. They have this open relationship, but it is pretty one-sided. Melinda chooses the lovers of her choice, and she brings home the men that she adores. She flaunts them right in her husband's face. And you can see, like in the movie, you can tell that like he is not about this life. It's tearing him up, but he lets her. He is desperate to keep her. He's desperate to give her the freedom that she has required. He sacrifices everything to keep her happy. And a lot of people would call him a simp, but we hear about dynamics like this a lot more than we'd care to admit. So Ben Affleck's character Vic allows this to go on. He allows his wife Melinda to have this open marriage in an attempt again to keep her happy. She says she will not stay with him if she cannot do what she pleases. All right, but instead of respecting their agreement, she uses these men to humiliate him. And this is a very clear example of emotional abuse and manipulation, but it's dressed up as consent. So remember, when we have these conversations, abuse is about control. Melinda manipulates Vic's devotion. She pushes him to the edge and he snaps. I won't spoil it, but he starts snapping in that movie. He cannot take it anymore. And stories like this make you think, who's the victim? On one hand, Vic's being controlled. He's being toyed with. He's being teased. He's being taunted over and over and over again. His pain is real. On the other hand, the decisions that he decides to make put blood on his hands. This is how toxic relationships thrive. They thrive in confusion. They thrive in power imbalances. They thrive in exploitation and manipulation. Gaslighting right here. But you said we could have an open relationship. But does that mean that you are supposed to torment me with that same agreement? These dynamics don't just happen in movies. The first two stories, they're true, right? One is anonymous, and I believe that he chose to be anonymous because men don't feel like they're allowed to tell their stories. All right, the other, another high profile celebrity case. Not our story, but examples of real life stories that someone you know or someone like you, or maybe even you, have been through. These situations create chaos, they create confusion and destruction, whether it's a man that is happening to or a woman. The implications are still that the cycle of abuse continue. We live in a world where men are supposed to be tough. They're supposed to be unbreakable. They're supposed to be the protectors. If you're a man and you admit that you've been abused, there's judgment. You're weak. You let it happen. Or quite simply, your story isn't worth my attention. There is no space for them to be weak or to admit that they are the ones who have been harmed. And this isn't true. We have to show that it is not true. These misconceptions are deeply rooted in our culture, and it's time for us to uproot them together. The National Domestic Violence Hotline says that 1 in 10 men have experienced rape, have experienced physical violence, have experienced stalking. The numbers aren't that different than what we see for women. But how many of these stories make it to the surface? How many of these stories do we hear about? I don't hear about them. Why is that? Because we have bought into this idea that men can't be victims, that abuse is a one-way street and men are only on one side of that street. This is not just wrong. This has become a silent crisis. When people are heartbroken, when people are silenced, healing becomes impossible. And so the cycles of abuse continue. Not only do they continue, they multiply. So here we give a voice to these issues so that they can be addressed. I want to be very clear. This channel is for everyone. This is not a place for division. We have enough of that. Discussions about abuse are not discussions about men against women or women against men. These discussions are about healing. These discussions are about elevating and empowering each other. Neither gender can heal on its own. We need each other. We don't have to do this alone. To the men who have suffered at the hands of abuse and toxic relationships, I see you. We as a community, we see you and we stand with you. This podcast is for you too. We can all break the silence together. Thank you for listening to the Self Mastery Podcast, where we've broken down yet another tough issue, and we will be offering more empowerment to come. If this message resonated with you, please like, subscribe, share this with someone who might need it.